everyone, and welcome back to another episode, I should say, of the greatest show in the galaxy. Now, before I get into it, there's something I have to address first, and you may have noticed it already. My camera that I'm using right now is not the best, to put it lightly. It's uh, it's a very old camera. I've had it for almost 4 years now, which for a camera, it's not it's a bit long. So my camera is starting to give me some problems and issues. You may or may not have noticed this little purplish line at the top. I will say this. Oh, there it goes. Yeah, I was going to mention this. It was much worse a minute ago in the green room when I tried to fix it, try to do all kinds of things. At one point, I was considering actually using, or rather, switching to the other camera, the one that's in my laptop. I would have to completely rearrange my laptop in order for you to see me. But for right now, the camera is still working, and hopefully, it will continue to work as well as it does now for the rest of the show. Full disclosure, everyone knows this show is pre-taped. I just finished doing a 2 hour show on another show on this channel. It ran for almost 2 hours, and I had practically zero problems with the camera. I only just started to do it now. So hopefully the camera will continue to work as well as it does now. And I am indeed planning on getting a new camera. And again, I'm using that word a lot, but hopefully this will be potentially the last time I will ever be recording anything with this camera. Like I said, this camera's been with me for a very long time, and it served its purpose. She's old now, and she needs to be put out of her misery. Now, going into the actual episode of itself, as you probably know by now, this is the show where I, the curator, discuss my favorite show of all time, my favorite franchise of all time, Doctor Who, and I'm actually pretty excited because this is the first time that I will be discussing. Hold on, let me just mute all audio from my my TV so I won't get any interruptions from Facebook notifications and whatnot throughout this entire episode. Today, I will be discussing This is the first time I will be discussing anything that's not at all related to the on-screen nature of Doctor Who. For those of you who don't know, everyone knows Doctor Who is a television show, but what people don't realize sometimes is that the franchise is so incredibly massive and much, much bigger than what you see on screen. There are obviously comic books, novels, radio shows, and all sorts of stuff. And today I will be discussing arguably the second biggest medium of this show, obviously second only to the TV show itself, but it's the second biggest medium for the show, and it actually I believe it has even more stories, a wider range of stories than the show itself. And I'm obviously talking about Big Finish. I will be discussing the very first ever Big Finish Doctor Who storyline, which is known as the Sirens of Time. And boy, oh boy, when Big Finish decided to make their very first ever Doctor Who straight up story, they did not go cheap on this one. They went for it. They immediately pulled out the big guns. They brought all three doctors, or rather past doctors, to appear in this episode. Peter Davison, the fifth Doctor, Collin Baker, the sixth Doctor, and Sylvester McCoy, the seventh Doctor. They opened big, and it really worked out for them. It served them well. This is the first of the was then eventually renamed the Monthly Adventures, which is a range of adventures that still goes on to this day. I believe right now they're up to like 300 episodes or something like that. And this was the first. So I guess opening big, this is essentially it can be considered as the pilot for this monthly range of monthly adventures. And like I said, it's still going on today, and it opened the door for so many other possibilities for the doctors to come back, past doctors to come back, past companions who maybe didn't get a fair shake at their characters on the show. It just really blew the doors open, and I will be talking about a little bit about the beginnings of it towards the end of this episode. But right now, it is time for us to start with the way I usually tend to start these episodes, just breaking down and explaining the plot of the episode. Now, obviously, keep in mind this is an audio only episode. It does not have any audio, any visuals in it. It's just the actors in front of a microphone with some music and sound effects happening in the background. It'll help just to help you sort of formulate how this is happening. And like I said, there is no artwork for this aside from maybe fan art. I would have imagined there's probably got to be fan art of some of these stories somewhere on the internet. But basically, it's just like hearing an episode or a movie with your eyes closed. At least that's the way I picture it. And I try to do that sometimes with some movies and shows that I potentially know. Hopefully, shows and movies where I already know what happens, but also I know the universe itself well enough so that I can make up the rest in my head, make up the creature designs and the areas and the settings that everything happens in. I can make that up in my head. So that's just a little something to help you sort of formulate in your mind what this episode would look like if it was a televised episode in a visual medium like television, which is what the show is mostly known for. Now, the episode itself starts obviously with the classic Doctor Who opening theme song, and the first thing you actually hear past the theme song is the familiar sound of a TARDIS landing somewhere. You hear footsteps coming out of the opening door, clearly indicating at least 2 or 3 people leaving this particular TARDIS. One of them says, or rather makes a reference to a Type 70 time capsule. Now, for those of you who don't know, there are multiple different types of TARDISes. Obviously, the higher the number, the more advanced the model. Specifically, the Doctor's TARDIS is a Type 40 TARDIS, one of the earlier ones to leave Gallifrey. And these two mysterious figures leaving the TARDIS that just landed are talking about a Type 70 TARDIS. They immediately find a mysterious character, apparently bruised and battered, asking them, practically begging for their help, saying that time itself is in danger and the Time Lords themselves are practically doomed if they don't do as he asks. Later in the story, that character is revealed to be, hold on, I should have had all these memorized, Vansel. No, yeah, I believe his name is Vansel. He is an agent of the CIA, the Celestial Intervention Agency, which is an agency mostly known for the 3 Doctors, but it's a really large organization in the Doctor Who universe. It's basically run entirely by Time Lords, specifically Time Lords who are permitted to break the rule of non-interference on Gallifrey, sending their agents to specific times in history to sort of shift everything into the direction that is supposed to be. So sort of like the Time Variance Agency from the most recent Loki series, and actually very similar to the Division, which was very recently introduced in the Jodie Whittaker series, the last 2 series, to be more specific. And then the episode itself continues to the 7th Doctor, Sylvester McCoy. There he is, leaving his TARDIS, which sort of crash landed on this swampy, forested planet. Again, I'm just telling you what the planet itself sounds like and what is said in the description by the characters on the planet, just to give you an idea of what the planet itself looks like. The Doctor leaves the TARDIS after hearing a woman's voice singing to him, causing him to change the coordinates on his TARDIS of where he was going. And at this point, it's important to point out that at this point in his timeline, the 7th Doctor is traveling on his own. Obviously, this takes place after the last episode of the original classic series, Survival, when obviously by the end of the episode, the Doctor and Ace are still traveling together. But at one point, it's mentioned in the New Adventures novels that Ace left him for a while and then came back. So this is during that time when the Seventh Doctor was traveling on his own. So he lands on that planet. That he leaves the TARDIS, and the TARDIS doors immediately lock behind him, and he's unable to open it. He's locked out of his own TARDIS. The key doesn't open the lock, and he's hearing a faint voice of a woman in danger somewhere far away from him. So he starts walking towards where he hears the voice. On his way there, he meets this rotund female woman-ish creature, and I say rotund because that's how other characters in the show described her, with a very a very sort of troll-ish voice. She taunts him, saying that the woman he's trying to save is already dead, and then she walks away. The Doctor then proceeds to the woman who is trapped in quicksand. He asks her name, which is Elenia, if I remember correctly. He uses his umbrella, which, as you can see here, that's basically the stick, the cane of the umbrella. His umbrella is shaped like a question mark at the bottom. I hope I probably should have found a better image of the umbrella to show, but he uses his umbrella to help pull her out of the quicksand. We're immediately treated into another scene where we hear the voice of that woman walking into a room where there's an old man who clearly has some affection towards her, but she completely despises him. And we learn from their conversation that he's an old man who has lost the ability to use his legs. And her job there is basically just to make sure she's basically like his nanny. She cleans up after him. She makes his bed. She changes his sheets. And as he's so keen to remind her, she also wipes his bottom when he can't do that himself. She then walks into another monitor where she talks into another character from a computer monitor off screen. Well, off planet, I should say, where we learn that she's serving a punishment. She's a convicted criminal who is serving a punishment. That punishment is to look after this man. After the Doctor has already pulled this woman out of the quicksand, they try to investigate what this planet is. According to her, she was on a ship with a full crew that is now entirely dead, and the reason they're dead is because their ship crash landed on this planet because this planet wasn't really supposed to be there. It was completely wiped from all star maps and star charts, very similar to Camino in Attack of the Clones. It didn't appear on any star chart, and so while they were flying through space, they essentially ran into a planet that wasn't really on the star chart. So basically, they just crash landed on a planet they didn't know was supposed to be there, and the entire crew died in the crash. The Doctor and the woman visit the crash site. The Doctor and the woman the Doctor himself is curious as to why the woman herself is the one and only survivor, completely left unmarked by anything from the planet. And the Doctor also has a strange sense that he knows her, that he met her before. He just can't, for the life of him, remember when or where. They are then they then make their way to an abandoned house. Not really abandoned, to a house. Sorry, it's a little hard to keep up with the way I'm speaking. They then make their way to a house on the planet where they find. Sorry, my bad. They are then greeted by flying robotic creatures, asking them to identify. The Doctor and this woman Elenia have no identification whatsoever, so they are then knocked out by these robotic flying creatures, and when they wake up in the house where the old man is, and we are led to believe that the woman, Ruthly is her name, the woman who's taking care of him, sort of took control over the situation. She's basically engineering her own escape plan as a sort of a way to escape her sentence, and she made a pact with alien creatures who are coming to this planet to essentially kill the old man. Sancroft is his name, and Sancroft begins to tell the Doctor and Alenia the story. And the doctor then obviously formulates a plan for them to escape, while also trying to help carry the old man who doesn't have the use of his wheelchair anymore because Ruthly, being true to her name, ruthless, she took away his wheelchair. So the doctor and Alenia have to carry him around everywhere. The alien creatures that land on the planet are then greeted by Ruthly, who is so excited and delighted and happy that they're finally going to take her away from the planet and kill this old man Sancroft. But her happiness soon turns to dread and fear when it's revealed by the creatures that they cannot allow any witnesses to be to anyone to bear witness to what they're about to do. So they immediately shoot her as they make their way to the house itself. It is then revealed by Sancroft himself that a very long time ago, a lifetime ago, according to him, he used to be a war criminal who did unspeakable things, and that is why these creatures, which again, I apologize, I have listened to this, I re-listened to it just a day or two ago, so I didn't really have much time to memorize all of them. But basically, these creatures are there to like I said, to execute him for crimes against their race, crimes against their empire, and the doctor himself talks to them on the monitor, saying that there's no reason for violence. Obviously, it's the doctor. He says there's no reason for violence. There's no reason for everything they do, and obviously they do not listen to him. They say that they don't have a quarrel with them. Their problem is mainly with this person Sancroft. But as I said earlier, there must be no witnesses. Apparently you hear gunshots or from their energy weapons, and that is how the first part of this story ends. We then got to the second part of this story, where we are treated by the Fifth Doctor, Peter Davison. The Fifth Doctor just landed his TARDIS apparently on a cargo hold of a ship. He clearly gives out a message to two people inside the TARDIS to leave the TARDIS and join him. But then, just like what happened with the Seventh Doctor, the TARDIS doors lock themselves behind him, and he's unable to enter his own TARDIS, leaving potentially Tegan and Turlough, according to what he says, his two companions at the time. He leaves them in the TARDIS. That's why I specifically wanted to point out that the Seventh Doctor is traveling alone during this time, so it will help people who don't really quite know the Big Finish timeline as well to kind of formulate where this is taking place within the Doctor's own personal timeline. The three Doctors specifically involved in this story. So this is definitely happening sometime, or maybe even after the Five Doctors, maybe even before. But it's basically, it could take place anywhere between Terminus, which is where Nyssa eventually left the Fifth Doctor, and Resurrection of the Daleks, which is where Tegan left traveling with the Doctor. So anywhere in between those two stories, this story could take place in. So like I said, the Doctor is trapped in the cargo hold of the space of this ship, or rather, sorry, it's a ship. He's trapped inside the cargo hold, and he's locked out of his TARDIS, and he hears a certain voice in his head telling him he must go back into the TARDIS. He must re-enter the TARDIS, but just like the Seventh Doctor, he's unable to open the doors because the key doesn't work. This scene is kind of intercut with another scene taking place on board a German submarine, who have located a British warship. Obviously, that's the ship that the Doctor happens to be on. And while he's in the cargo hold, he encounters a young woman with an Irish accent named Helen, who, much like Elenia, the Fifth Doctor starts to feel that as if he knows her, as if he met her. And while they're talking, you can hear the faint voice of the woman singing in the background. Very shortly after the Germans armed their torpedoes on their submarine and destroy the ship, the Doctor and Helen are drifting along the sinking ship while the Doctor is trying to get back into his TARDIS, and he's completely unsuccessful in re-entering his time ship, I should say, before they are being picked up by the German submarine. And from a conversation between the Doctor and his saviors slash captors, because they captured them as prisoners of war. From the conversation between the Doctor and the captain, the Doctor is able to deduce that this German submarine that they are basically in the middle of World War One, the First World War, as he says it. Obviously, there's that moment where Mark Gatiss and Peter Capaldi did in Twice Upon a Time, where the Doctor mentions World War One, and Mark Gaddis's character is surprised to hear that there's going to be a World War Two somewhere down the line, and obviously the Doctor mentions spoilers. So the German soldiers lock the Doctor and Helen up in the brig, and the Doctor manages to come up with a clever plan to hopefully help him get back into the TARDIS, like the Time Lord's, the person, the voice in his head wanted him to do. So he asks permission to speak to the captain, revealing to him that he's actually a German spy and that there are British vital information that could help the Germans win the war on board a blue crate, which was the crate that he and Helen were holding on to as they were drifting away after they blew up the ship. Obviously, this is a clever ruse from the Doctor to get back to his TARDIS, but the captain initially doesn't believe him because, obviously, being a spy, he has no proof of him being a spy. So the captain decides to take that under consideration while telling one of his soldiers, Schmidt, to take the Doctor back to his holding place. On his way there, we hear the familiar voice of the CIA Time Lord, who tried to convince to try to get the Doctor to go back into his TARDIS, except this time we hear it in Schmidt's head. And Schmidt, the German soldier, as soon as he brings the Doctor back to the holding cell with Helen, he starts to attack the Doctor, trying to strangle him, essentially trying to kill him, to which Helen immediately grabs something to knock him over the head with. And obviously the German soldiers show up, and they show up just in time to see Schmidt being essentially what they deduce as being possessed by a mysterious force. That obviously that is the best way that they can explain it. He's essentially possessed by some sort of seafaring spirit that convinces him to kill the first person he's around. And obviously that is really the story that they go with, and that is kind of how the Doctor tries to play it as to help to essentially get their help in order to get back to his TARDIS. The story then cuts to another scene back on Gallifrey in the Panopticon. We hear the president of the Time Lords at the time talking to the CIA Time Lord, asking him basically, is all this necessary? Now something very important you have to remember, all the events taking place here predate the Time War by a very, very long time, especially on Gallifrey, physically on present-day Gallifrey. This predates the Time War. So for those of you who have only watched the modern era series and have a certain feel or understanding of how the Time Lords perceived the Doctor himself during the modern era, this is nothing like that. This is the Doctor who did not fought in the Time War yet. This is the Doctor who, at this specific point in his lifetime, was still the president of Gallifrey. He was the fourth Doctor, Tom Baker, was elected president of Gallifrey. And it's a position that the Doctor has held and has used to his advantage in certain events on and off throughout his 5th, 6th, and 7th incarnations, So this is basically the Lord President at the time, as a fellow president, is considering is if all of this is really necessary, is attacking and potentially killing the Doctor really necessary to prevent whatever is actually coming, the danger that this Time Lord says is going to happen. And this Time Lord continues to try to convince the Lord President that everything that they're doing right now is necessary and essential to the continued survival and continued existence of the Time Lords. Meanwhile, back on the German submarine, the Doctor continues to question why Helen is helping him. He continues to question the time distortions that he's experienced already with the voices in his head, with Schmidt turning on him and starting to attack him. None of this particularly makes much sense to the Doctor, but while Helen is trying to nurse him back to health. Eventually, he's somehow able to convince the German captain to take him back. No, sorry. Schmidt then wakes up. He's not fully aware of what happens, and the Doctor manages to take his gun while the German soldiers show up with their guns drawn. But the Doctor aims his gun at the captain, threatening to kill him if they do not lower their weapons, and if the captain doesn't take him back to the blue crate that he's trying to get back to, the TARDIS. Obviously. Now, again, this is a very different Doctor from the post-Time War era, where he's just completely appalled by guns and refuses to use one. This is a Doctor who, especially the fifth incarnation, this is a Doctor who was not afraid to use a gun when necessary. He even is seen using a gun to shoot people in Resurrection of the Daleks, the episode that I've already mentioned a couple of minutes ago. So this Doctor he still opposes violence, and he still considers himself a pacifist, but he does not shy away from grabbing a weapon when the opportunity essentially forces him. So, and obviously the Doctor had no plans of ever shooting the German captain, but the Germans did not know that. So the soldiers then take the Doctor back to his TARDIS, and the Doctor immediately jumps off the submarine and swims towards his TARDIS, getting away. Then that more or less is the end of the second part, which then we cut forward to part 3, where we see the Sixth Doctor, played by Colin Baker. He's in the TARDIS. He's unable to pilot the TARDIS away from some sort of time-space anomaly. The TARDIS is dragged into this time-space anomaly, and then the Doctor finds himself in some sort of computer terminal inside a what appears to be a giant flying spaceship. He meets a woman trying to hack one of the computers, holding a disc in her hand, and he's completely disoriented and unaware of his surroundings. She asks him if he's one of the delegates and if he wants to eat or drink something, claiming that she is a waitress named Eileen. I think that's her name. He then continues with the proposed version of the story that he's one of the delegates, and he asks her to take him back to the meeting hall and find his seat. Using a computer monitor, the Doctor and manages to deduce that basically this whole cruise ship full of delegates is they're sort of a giant council of people who decide what could be classified as a wonder of the universe, similar to what we have on planet Earth. As a matter of fact, the 7 wonders of the Earth. This is basically a council that decides what type of spatial phenomenon is worthy of being named one of the many wonders of the universe. Now, I probably should have looked it up. The Kurgan Wonder. That's where the ship is. The ship is circling the Kurgan Wonder, a gaseous type of phenomenon, sort of a giant sentient gas cloud in the Kurgan system, which is where the people of the Kurgan system try to convince the main council that their uh, phenomenon, the Kurgan Wonder, deserves to be considered as one of the many wonders of the universe. The ship itself then goes through a time distortion shard, which leaves the entire ship completely disoriented, and basically it pretty much destroys most of the ship, killing the 500 crewmen and the 5,000 delegates, essentially killing everyone on the ship except the doctor, Ellie. Sorry, I looked it up. It is her name is Ellie, and the android co-pilot Azimenda. Azimenda eventually finds the doctor and Ellie, and decides to bring them to, and the doctor obviously convinces him to take him to the bridge, uh, so that he can figure out what happened. Uh, Now, as the same thing that happened with the fifth and seventh doctors, the doctor begins to question the motives of this girl who he found near the computer terminal, uh, saying that he feels like he's already met her before, like he knows her. And he also asks her why she was at the computer terminal with a disk, planning to potentially hack the computer, if all she really is a waitress. Now, in a conversation that takes place off mic, I should say, the doctor manages to deduce that she is a member of a rebellious group, trying to convince, trying to take, or rather, trying to make sure that the gaseous wonder known as the Kurgan Wonder is not considered one of the wonders of the universe. Uh, during their journey towards the the bridge, I should say, uh, the same CIA Time Lord manages to take over Azimenda's mind, since it's an android creature, much according to him, much easier to manipulate. He uses Azimenda to try to uh, convince the doctor, try to force the doctor to go back to Gallifrey, telling him that Gallifrey needs him. While he's doing it, creatures have landed on Gallifrey itself and have essentially started attacking the Time Lords, taking prisoners and essentially bringing the Time Lords to their knees. And also they eventually reach the Panopticon. They attack the president. They attack the Time Lord, trying to tell the Doctor to get back to Gallifrey. And with that Time Lord's essentially dying breath, or their last words before regeneration potentially, he's able to tell the Doctor to not release the Temporon. Then later in that very same story, the Doctor is able to discover that the Temporon is essentially a time beast, a space whale type creature, very similar to. I mean, I just said space whales, so you can imagine the implications. But it's not only just a space whale; it is a space time whale trapped inside the Kurgan Wonder for whatever reason. The Doctor then does what the Doctor usually does. He frees the Temporon. The Temporon then is able to speak to him, confused over what he did. And then the last thing that the Temporon is able to say to the Doctor is, "Beware the Sirens of Time." End of part 3. Part 4 then takes place pretty much entirely on Gallifrey. It's where all 3 Doctors, which, hold on, I just really like seeing this image. But yeah, this is basically the what is on the marquee. All 3 Doctors are brought back together to Gallifrey itself, where they meet each other, essentially for the first time for these guys. And obviously, all three of these actors have been on screen in the same story at one point, 1993's Dimension in Time, but they never actually got to meet each other on screen. They never got to interact with each other. They never had that familiar camaraderie that happens when a doctor meets another version of himself or herself, as the case may seem now. So it was definitely a nice moment to have all three of them realize that all three of them are the Doctor in future moments and different moments of themselves. Obviously, the fifth Doctor seeing the sixth and seventh Doctors saying, "So this is how things end up for me," to which the sixth Doctor, referencing the seventh Doctor, is saying, "And for me." So the three Doctors then eventually, almost immediately, uh, are being trapped by uh, alien creatures that. Hold on, I should probably try to get better at this, but it's the Knights of Velicia. That's that's the name of the species, or rather the empire, who claiming themselves the second great empire of Velicia, with obviously the Knights of Velicia. It's revealed that they are the ones who invaded Gallifrey in the previous episode, and they are the ones who took all the Time Lords hostage. And their leader is Knight Commander Elenia, which obviously then ties into all these women who the Doctor has met in three separate time zones, with Elenia on the Sixth Doctor's first part, Helen on the Fifth Doctor's second part, and Ellie during the Sixth Doctor's third part. Knight Commander Elenia. Um, Her true purpose is yet to be revealed at this point, but at this point, you've already the audience, or rather the listener, has already been able to pick up where this particular story is going. So uh, the three Doctors are able to escape from Knight Commander Elenia and her second in command, Commander Solonic. They escape through a Jeffrey tube that leads them all the way down to an under a lower level on Gallifrey. They then fall on essentially on each other. The fifth Doctor breaks his leg in the process, and then the other two Doctors have to keep helping him walk. At one point, the Doctors then decide unanimously that it would be much better if they leave the fifth Doctor behind, while the sixth and seventh Doctors try to figure out what is going on. The fifth Doctor gets captured by the Knights of Alicia, where Knight Commander Elenia uses some sort of technology to completely heal his now broken leg. Meanwhile, the seventh and sixth Doctors find a chamber where the Temporon itself is being held captive and being tortured and tormented by the Knights of Alicia to perform some sort of. The Knights of Alicia have the Temporon trapped there for reasons that the Doctors do not know just yet. They notice the Commander Solonic taking off his armor, noticing that his entire body is bruised and full of blemishes and is completely diseased, is one way of saying it. And then they're using powers from the Temporon itself to help heal him, but he cannot heal himself completely. Over the course of the next few minutes, the Doctor, through a conversation with Knight Commander Elenia, they discover that the Knights of Alicia, their species, is just sick. The entire species is sick and is so slowly going extinct. That's why they're using all of their resources and powers and abilities to try and conquer other races like the Time Lords and use their technology and biology to help cure them and help heal their entire species. Obviously, they're relying on the Time Lords' ability to regenerate in order to help heal their species. Then the sixth and seventh doctors have a conversation with the Temperon, where the Temperon essentially reveals the Alenia's true plan. Knight Commander Elenia is not at all one of the members of the Knights of Elysia. She's actually one of the Sirens of Time. Now, what are the Sirens of Time? They are essentially creatures that only live to cause chaos and mayhem throughout time. They cannot directly interfere with time itself, but they can appear as female creatures to whatever species they so choose, to try to help manipulate certain people into doing stuff that would change the course of history. At that point, while the Fifth Doctor is still in the main Panopticon room with with Knight Commander Alenia and the Sixth and Seventh Doctor on a computer monitor, the Siren of Time, known as at that moment as Knight Commander Alenia, reveals that it was basically all three of the Doctors in different points of their timelines that caused all of this to happen. The Seventh Doctor, landing on the mysterious planet with Sancroft and Ruthley, try to convince the creatures that were sent there to kill him to not kill Sancroft. Sancroft was able to eventually escape and inspire a new empire to rise in his name. The Fifth Doctor on the German submarine, because he diverted the submarine towards his TARDIS, he prevented the Germans from eventually destroying an American ship that was in the area, which it's a bit complicated. I needed a while to I needed to re-listen to that moment a couple of times, but he prevented the Germans from destroying sinking the American ship known as the Lusitania, where on board the Lusitania was a a person who would eventually one day cause the death of Alexander Fleming. And for those of you who don't know who Alexander Fleming is, he is he's the man that discovered penicillin during the First World War. So he basically, by diverting the Germans from their original course, they did not just sunk the Lusitania, where the person on board will eventually kill Alexander Fleming about a month after the fact. So with no penicillin, planet Earth had a massive outbreak of a devastating plague, which killed a lot of people in the 1950s, and the surviving members of the human race did not eventually choose to go with space travel, which eventually prevented the human race from defeating the Knights of the First Empire of the Knights of Elysia in the year 3050. Like I said, it's very complicated, and I needed to re-listen to that part multiple times to finally get there. And obviously, the Sixth Doctor, his distortion of time was releasing the Temperon, which allowed then the Knights of Elysia to trap the Temperon and use his power of time travel to invade Gallifrey and take the Time Lords hostage. And Knight Commander Alenia then reveals that what she actually wants the Doctors to do is to travel back in time to prevent everything that they just did, so that the Knights of Elysia don't get as badly diseased as they do right now. And that would essentially cause even more chaos and paradoxes all throughout time, so that the Sirens of Time can feed on it. So while the Seventh and Fifth Doctors refused to let that happen, the Fifth Doctor, being the thinker that he is, continuously tries to figure out an alternate way of ending the plan. The Seventh Doctor all he really cares about is his compassion towards the Temperon, making sure that the Temperon does not go through any more suffering as the result of the Sirens of Time. But eventually, what the Sixth Doctor does is what the Sixth Doctor usually does. He's the more practical and pragmatic of the three, as he claims. He basically just shoots all the knights in the area, releasing the Temperon, and the Temperon himself goes in and attacks the Sirens of Time, putting himself in a eternal struggle and conflict, uh, trying to keep the Sirens of Time from causing any more damage to the time-space continuum for the rest of eternity, essentially. And that was really what the Seventh Doctor was trying to avoid happening, putting the Temperon, putting himself in that position where he constantly has to struggle and fight for his own existence in order to maintain and preserve the continued flow of time. And then all three Doctors then eventually land on the mysterious swampy planet where the Seventh Doctor's TARDIS landed. They once again hear the cries for help from Elenia. Obviously, the one of the Sirens of Time disguised as the woman. The Seventh Doctor then chooses to do something that he arguably should have done at the beginning, but obviously he did, with the benefit of hindsight, he didn't really know everything that the listener at this point knows now. All three of the Doctors decide to ignore the woman's cries for help. They leave her to the mercy of Ruthly, which is the woman I mentioned earlier, who was the maid to Sancroft. The Seventh Doctor offers all three Doctors to step inside his TARDIS so that he can help them look for their TARDISes wherever they may be, so that all three of the Doctors can once again separate and go about their separate ways, which is around around the same way that every multi-Doctor story eventually ends. And that was the end of the story, The Sirens of Time. Now, I will say this. I apologize if I had trouble conveying everything that happened in the story. Again, I've only listened to the story twice. I listened to it once years ago and really, to be honest, did not remember a lot from the story, which is why I decided to re-listen to the story again for the purposes of this episode in and of itself. And I only listened to it once more last night, as a matter of fact. I listened to all of it. So that's why I still had problems piecing together the sequence of events that have happened in this episode. It's not like an episode of the show where I have more visual memory of that episode to kind of help guide me through explaining what happens in the episode itself. And also, it's not really a story that I've re-listened to or rewatched multiple times, like most of the episodes of the show that I did. So it was a little hard for me to piece together the complete sequence of events, but I think for the most part I did a really good job explaining, or rather breaking down and walking you all through the story in and of itself. I will say this: I did not. I listened to it years ago, as I mentioned. Can't really remember where or when, but leading up to the story, it's leading up to this episode, I knew I'd have to listen to it again. So this being the first episode of this show where I actually get to talk about Big Finish, there is something that I would like to point out. I was able to get this episode relatively cheap because about a week or so ago, it might actually still be going on, I don't know, but about a week or so ago, Big Finish celebrated the Fifth Doctor's 40th anniversary since stepping into the TARDIS. This is basically this year, 40 years ago, Peter Davison had his first full story as the Doctor, taking over from his predecessor, Tom Baker. And to celebrate this, the Big Finish came up with a brand new massive storyline for the Fifth Doctor, simply named 40, which brings back obviously Peter Davison as the Doctor, Sarah Sutton as Nyssa, blanking on the name of the actress who played Tegan, but they also brought back Matthew Waterhouse as Adric. Hold on, give me a second. Janet Fielding. Sorry, Janet Fielding as Nyssa. It's a story that involves Cybermen and Ice Warriors. Hold on, let me see if I can look up an image of the story itself. But also as a way of celebrating uh, the Fifth Doctor's 40th anniversary, there was a massive sale going around Big Finish of a lot, pretty much every Big Finish story that happens to involve the Fifth Doctor, and that is mostly how I was able to get this episode relatively on the cheap. And I also I bought like 5 or 6 more stories involving the Fifth Doctor. It only cost like $9. Now I should probably point out that this whole show is not sponsored by Big Finish. I'm just letting you know I was able to get this episode on the cheap if the sale is still going on. And if you're interested in listening to this very first story and maybe some of the other very early Fifth Doctor stories, there's a chance you might be able to still get these on the cheap over on the Big Finish website. I highly recommend getting the Big Finish app, so that way you can actually own these stories together. Forever. And another really big perk of purchasing these Big Finish episodes from the Big Finish website is, just like I did, I got a special bonus feature of this episode, which is basically interviews with the 3 doctors involved, the actors involved in this in this story, the cast and crew, the people who sort of got this whole story off the ground, and you can actually get to hear them talk about the history of how this whole thing came about. They obviously mention a bunch of radio episodes involving previous doctors like John Pertwee, may he rest in peace, and Tom Baker, who actually have had radio audio episodes of Doctor Who with their own respective companions long before Big Finish started to using Doctor Who. And you can kind of get semblance from Mark Geddes and from Nicholas Briggs and Gary Russell, how they essentially were able to put this whole thing together, and how they eventually started what would eventually become the Big Finish empire of Doctor Who, which is what they have right now. This is, like I said, the first of many Doctor Who stories on Big Finish. The behind the scenes bonus feature basically explains how all this got started. Here is an image of the 40 event that I mentioned earlier. We can clearly see the Fifth Doctor with some Cybermen and Ice Warriors and Tegan and Nyssa and Adric, and there's some Cybermites I can see there. Obviously the TARDIS, all kinds of very interesting things. But that is a story for another day. Maybe one day we'll even cover this story on this channel as soon as I get to purchase it and listen to it. But I would highly recommend visiting the Big Finish website to see if that sale is still going. And just remember to check out if you're interested in Big Finish, if my mostly amateurish breakdown of this episode got you interested enough in the Big Finish storylines and in the type of storylines that they can tell on Big Finish, I highly recommend checking it out. I think you're going to have a lot of fun. If you're a Doctor Who fan, especially a classic Doctor Who fan, that is the place for you. There are so many stories with so many of the original actors reprising their roles. And if that's not really your thing, there are also several episodes, or rather several ranges, I should say, involving some of the more modern stuff. There's a lot of brand new Big Finish stories involving the Ninth Doctor, Christopher Eccleston coming back to reprise his role after leaving it in 2005. The 10th Doctor, David Tennant, is coming back to do a lot of stuff now. There's an entire series completely devoted to Missy, with Michelle Gomez obviously reprising her role. Arthur Darvill is also reprising his role a lot as Rory Williams in his standalone series named The Lone Centurion, which is basically all about the 2,000 years that Rory basically guarded the Pandorica. There's special episodes involving the Pasternacker gang with Madame Vastra, Strax, and Jenny also reprising their roles. There's speaking of Jenny, there's the Doctor's daughter, Jenny, from the Doctor's Daughter episode, played by Georgia Tennant. Lady Christina de Souza is also there a lot. The Derek Jacobi as the War Master. I think he's up to like his 8th season or something like that. There's a special 4-part story involving the War Doctor with John Hurt in his last performance as the Doctor before he passed away. Obviously, there's the War Doctor Begins, which is like the early days of the Time War. There's so many things to explore that I can just spend an entire episode of this show talking about everything that you can find on that website. So, and always just check that website down. They are always having sales on or discounts, so it's always worthwhile checking if there's something you're interested. Maybe you can get it on the cheap, which is what I did with the Sirens of Time. But that is basically all I can really say about this episode and the backstage, the behind the scenes stuff. I think I've already talked long enough, and after last week's episode, I think I really should try to make these shorter, at least trying to reach the 1 hour mark, which is what I was dictated by the people who run this channel. So this was my 3rd episode of The Greatest Show in the Galaxy. The first episode where I get to talk about everything that's related to Doctor Who outside the television screens. I have so many good ideas planned. I mean, there's so much I can talk about, like books and comics that I'm really interested in, and I can really talk all I want on this show. But next week, I will be it's more of a less structured, just laid back show of me just talking about my love for the franchise and my love for Doctor Who, more specifically the Doctor himself, the character, the companions, and just the villains. Everything I love about Doctor Who, basically in a sort of similar way to Ken Napzok's book, Why We Love Star Wars, except less professional because it's me, obviously. So if you enjoyed my my passion towards this channel, towards Doctor Who, you can also check out my own YouTube channel, 50 Shades of Geek. I'm planning a massive rebrand of the channel very, very soon. I do some Doctor Who stuff on there. I also do a lot of Schmodown stuff. Right now, my biggest priority right now is catching up with all of the Schmodown matches from Season 8 that I still have yet to see, because 5 to 6 matches a week is a lot, and I have had a very hectic year, especially going towards the end of 2021. But right now, I'm just taking advantage of the break in between Season 8 and Season 9 to watch all of them and post my reaction videos to them. I can also be found all over this channel, obviously, every Wednesday on The Greatest Show in the Galaxy. I regret to say I was not on the most recent episode of Get Sweaty. I got very sleepy. I got sleepy on Get Sweaty, and I just slept through the entire episode, completely missing it, which sometimes happens to me, unfortunately, with my job being what it is. But when I'm not working myself half to death, I can also be found on Get Sweaty every week, hopefully. And occasionally I show up on Let's Talk About Star Wars, the online taco stand, which I just did a couple of days ago as of the recording of this video. And I can be found all over this channel. You can also check out all the other wonderful people on this channel. There's Double D and Jess the Kiwi have their Schmodown Analytics show. as I mentioned, Let's Talk About Star Wars, Taco, and Evan, also known as Gold Leader from the Schmodown. They do something very similar to what I do on this show, just about Star Wars, and a lot less tedious and more fun because it's more than just one person talking for about an hour. There's Schmodown, Northern Unwind, a show that I just happened to be on a couple of hours ago, and all kinds of fun, great shows that you can enjoy over on the Northern Entertainment Group YouTube channel. So with that, I believe I've said more than enough, and it's time to end this episode. So join me next week when I talk about my love for Doctor Who, and I will see you all on that one, hopefully. Goodbye for now.